comic book films there are nowadays. It's easy to forget that there's this distinction here between superhero films, which are based on comic books, and comic book films per se. It's just taken for granted we mean Marvel and DC films. So Robert Rodriguez is pretty valuable in that respect and kind of reminding us that the two are not equivalent and that comic books do cover a much larger range of topics. Unfortunately, I'm not here to really do a lot of praise with Sin City. To me, it feels like a really muddled mess. It's an interesting experiment, and you can definitely see the energy, passion, and drive that Rodriguez is trying to bring to the project. He clearly admires the work of Frank Miller, which this is based on, but the results are just so scattershot, so all over the place, and really chaotic that I really can't even recommend the movie. I could only recommend looking up certain scenes, just catching the trailer, because really this is a film where the trailer alone, you can just pretty much imagine the rest of the movie by yourself because it doesn't have much of a narrative logic. It doesn't have really characters. And even though it stars tons of people, I mean, the names alone are insane. And nobody's giving like bad performances per se. It's just performances just kind of pummel you and just being overwhelmed at the sensory level. And I actually don't mind those films that are just really kinetic and really in love with their own style and just not giving any kind of concession to the audience. But here, this actually feels really close to J.J. Abrams of being very market tested, because even though the material is very explicit and very offensive, right? Whatever you can say about Miller, he's not politically correct. And I do appreciate that from him. This is not really his strongest work. With Miller, we're always going to have a lot of controversies whether his earlier middle phases are his strongest. But I have to agree with Alan Moore. Those are really peak Miller. His middle and late stuff is still very, very strong. Don't get me wrong. I read 300 and was very impressed by it. The Yellow Bastard is a really great story. But mostly his middle to late career is kind of very plotting. And the adaptations don't really help. On the one hand, it's good that Rodriguez is trying to stay faithful to the essence. He can't do the whole stories because it's just going to take too long. I understand that. So it's really a mashed up job, a collage of the stories and infused with Miller. And I say Miller over and over again because Miller was on set. Miller clearly supervised certain things. He makes a cameo. So it's good that he's trying to be respectful to the material. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. But again, we have to actually judge the film as it's finally translated. The fact that it's very faithful is great and makes it stand out on many levels. And the fact that he's into the neo-noir, and this is a neo-noir comic book, should really be a nice marriage. But it just doesn't quite fit. It's not a terrible movie, but it is kind of Justice League bad, where it's entertaining enough. It's never boring, but you keep wondering yourself, there is a much better movie in here somewhere. Maybe there's a different cut. Maybe they edited out too many scenes. Maybe they ran out of money. None of those conspiracy theories really work. It's just this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to do a kind of trashy, flashy adaptation that really just samples Miller's work and is really more like this fast-paced music video. It's not really a film, and I have no problem with fast-paced music videos, but even Michael Bay can control himself and produce something like The Island. And I wish he kind of did something like this here, where he really, really slowed down, give us what he thinks Miller's work is all about. But really, we're just getting the broad outlines of his style. And I don't think he's sensitive enough to what Miller is doing in his books. Because yes, we have hookers, corrupt cops, gangsters, over-the-top action, those kinds of things. But it's painted. And I don't think he's sensitive enough to that he's a painter. And you really can't replicate that. Even with something like Zack Snyder's Watchmen, where he really tries to replicate the frames, it's really, really hard to replicate a comic book that's painted. It's so individualized to what the creator is trying to do. And Miller has this weird sense of humor with his dialogue and his writing that, again, even when they quote verbatim the dialogue, when he changes just a few small details, it doesn't have the same effect. So you're kind of left with, okay, this is an interesting mystical space, but what exactly is this thing? Where's it going? It just doesn't seem to have the identity that Gotham City or Metropolis does. It just seems like, all right, just these weird archetypes keep appearing, then they disappear, then they come back. And that's about it. I would say one final thing, though, that I really appreciated Josh Hartnett. I know a lot of people are very critical of him and just love to hate him, but I think he's a really good actor, and I found his cameo really interesting. But that's the kind of thing. You just feel snatches of brilliance here and there, but otherwise it's kind of a heap of a mess. And if it's worth your time to go through, then by all means. But legitimately judging it, it's a 5 out of 10. It's not really critical to see it, but it is, like, from a film historian angle, it's really fascinating. And also, if you're a diehard comic book fan, just as a completist, this really will kind of round out your education. And don't be fooled by the label comic book movie. It can be much more expansive, much more philosophical, much more serious, but also much more goofy than I think the usual DC or Marvel films might lead you to expect that it has to be a certain way. And I appreciate it in that it's really breaking our conventional understanding of what a comic book movie should be or will be or could be. But beyond the kind of possibilities that were inherent in this film, I don't see much here that is really powerful. It just seems it's trying to do something, but it doesn't quite get there. But it's definitely a noble, sincere effort, but ultimately not a very good one or strong one at the end of the day. And this is nothing against Rodriguez. People think he can never make a good film. No, he can. He's occasionally a very good director, but unfortunately, he's a very mediocre director overall. And this is really strong material. So maybe he just needs to search for a different project, a different Miller book, a different Miller story. He has a lot of them besides this. It just doesn't seem the right fit between his passion and Miller's passion, unfortunately. All right, this has been Pop Cult Analyzed on the mismarriage of Robert Rodriguez and Frank Miller in Sin City. Thanks for listening.